sands.
Oh, so it connected with sliding sands
Right,
if people wanted to descend.
Except it was the old Halemaʻu, the one that's a much steeper descent.
Oh yeah,
that was
I've
just
been on that one. Woo, woo, woo. It's like zigzag.
So that's where it would have gone down, and then it would have gone across. This map right here is an 1885 map, and it'll probably be difficult to show on the monitors and things like that, but I've got it oriented exactly the same way as the last one. And we actually have an overlay of a TMK map here. So right here is Olinda Road coming up. And can you see that dotted line, Lucian?
Yeah, I can.
That dotted line going up right there is showing the old trail. And in fact, it says right here, Haleakala Trail. And right here is where it crosses. That light green line is where it crosses the modern day one. And you can't see it here, but here's actually the overlay of the Ahu. So what we know is in 1904 and 1905, when they were doing the survey work, they actually reoriented the trail a little bit to bring it up in a little bit more gentle topography.
So this trail was on the old maps, and it was described in print, and it actually exists in some physical form now, but it stopped having public use at a certain point?
Right, and that's a great segue if I can continue on.
Sure, yeah.
All right. So let me just first say, and this goes back to something I mentioned at the beginning, is we're not really interested in doing anything other than working on what we consider to be public trails. And here, the state has already paved the way. As early as the year 2000, this was an abstractor who works for the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and she said, you know, for the reasons stated herein, this is just a summary, but I wanted to provide just a little bit from this memo that was written to Mike Baker, the Maui District Trails Manager at the time.
Oh yeah, I remember Mike.
But Moana Rowland, at that point, the abstractor said, for the reasons stated herein, we are of the opinion that Haleakala Bridle Trail is a public trail. Mm-hmm. So it's been the state's position that this is a public trail. They just haven't pushed the issue.
Yeah.
Well,
it's like a lot of things where, you know, it's kind of a... it's going to be a challenge to work out a practical solution. So people just push it to the side and they do other things. Right,
and of course there are issues just in terms of the funds available to the state to take on different issues and that kind of thing. In 2004, and these are just a few examples, this was from Kurt Cottrell, who used to be the program manager for the Na'ala Heli program, and he was writing to someone in the land division, and this was just during an agency review process, but he says, hey, want to let you know that Department of Land and Natural Resources, this is a quote, Department of Land and Natural Resources claims ownership of the historic trail, okay? In 2009, and this was after we were involved at least in negotiations and working and writing letters back and forth to the state as well as to the ranch, in 2009, one of the Deputy Attorney Generals for the state of Hawaii wrote to then Chairperson Laura Thielen, who had requested an opinion about the ownership of the Haleakala Trail.
So there's been a lot of discussion. It's not like this is like no one's paid attention to it. There's been a lot of discussion over the last decade.
That's correct.
About the trail.
Right, and
but before PATH ever got interested.
A lot of opinions by the state that this is, you know, and what this one, the brief answer, just the first one is, Haleakala Trail appears to be an ancient or historical trail existing before the Highways Act of 1892. And she goes on in this one, this little thing here to say, you know, on the whole, we think more likely than not, which is written as we lawyers tend to say things.
I see. Is that lawyer speak?
You know, more, and she uses a little slightly different ones, but she's not totally coming out. But she says, you know, it looks like there's a good chance that, in fact, the state has ownership of this. Yeah. And this is a quite extensive memo talking about it. And what she talks about are a lot of the theories that are out there. One of the things I should mention, by the year 2009, when this letter was written, all of the opinions by the state so far, none of them had the information that I'm going to show you. So they were all based upon less documentary evidence. And I'm sure if they had what we had at the time, for whatever reason they didn't have it. But if they had had it, they would have been issuing a much stronger opinion, and we think that that's really the thing that's the tide changing on
So
this.
your research has found things that were in state archives or accessible to the state, but they weren't basing any kind of review on.
They've never seen this as far as we know because they've never reviewed them. I mean, they relied upon some other pieces of information, but not these.
Well, let's get to that part, Tom.
All right.
This is getting exciting.
So you know, so just as way of a background, there's a lot of different ways that a trail can be public in Hawaii, and so the state AG lays some of those out. If it's ancient, it can be public. If there's an existing right-of-way that was not extinguished by the Land Commission back in the 1800s, that would mean it's still public. If we use some of the old doctrines of dedication prescription, it could be public. And the one that we'll spend the most time on is the Highways Act of 1892, which is a really important statute in our books, still in the books today.
Yeah, that's referred to a lot, that, well, if a road was on a map before a certain date,
right,
it's subject to the Highways Act.
Right, and here we go. Here I actually have a slide on that. And just to real quickly say, the Highways Act says if it belongs to the government, if it was already a public trail before 1892.
There we go.
Okay, and guess what? The courts have said that if there was the thing called the Great Mehele, which is when there was the distribution of,
yes,
by the king of all the lands, and that was really started our Western concept. And and
that was in the 1840s.
And that was 1848, right? And we'll see that timeline here in a moment. But what the courts have said is, look, anything prior to the Great Mehele is public because that's the way things were back then.
Yeah, things were traditional, and we have to respect that
right,
they had a general public ownership because
yep,
they were traditionally used by everybody.
Here's the one other one I'll mention is if the government constructed or maintained the trail after 1892, then clearly that's it shows government ownership.
Yeah, I've seen that reference too. You know, if you can prove that the government was actually taking care of maintaining and so forth,
right,
it's a little hard to say that this isn't a public trail.
Okay, yeah, so let's talk through some of the documents we found. First, just a really quick chronology. Of course, we know that we don't know how long, but probably for centuries, the Hawaiians were using a trail up to the top. 1828 was the first recorded ascent, so it actually shows up in the books. And here's one of the interesting things that this group of three who were sailors or something, I think they were actually on a military expedition, and they came over and they said, hey, let's go to the top, you know.
Top of Haleakala.
Top of Haleakala, and they said, we were told by the natives that the way was long, but the ascent was very easy, which is certainly an indication that the natives knew the way, the Hawaiians knew the way.
Mm-hmm.
In 1848, that's when the Great Mehele happened, and of course that was our division, and that's when the conveyance occurred to a chief of the lands that Haleakala Ranch has now. But what we know is that the trail existed before that date through there. Then in 1850...
And you know that because these people used the trail in the 1820s
and what we are certain, if you go back to the reports, they talk about the ancients using this trail, and of course we don't have an archaeologist that's done that research. But I'm fairly confident that if we had an archaeologist, we would get an opinion that the trail was there for a very long time, you know, predating Captain Cook, probably, which would have been in the 1700s. So at any rate, in 1853, there was a Land Commission award that was issued, which just perfected that, but it doesn't necessarily have given up any rights to the trail, because in any Land Commission award, there's an express reservation of the rights of the native tenants. And
yeah, you see that in every deed from the Mehele and for grants and things like that that were made to non-Hawaiians even.
And the state talks about that in their opinions about the Haleakala Trail. And just by the way, there's a lot of, this has historical, the people that first came here that we have heard about, like Mark Twain, that's certainly how he had to have gotten to the top, although we can't see exactly the route that he took. But we know that he went up the North Shore. And of course, Mark Twain had something funny to say about it. He says, you know, we made it to the top and anchored on the summit where we built a fire and froze and roasted by turns all night. So, but once again, I think the thing that this points out is that walking up the trail as opposing to walking to the top as opposing to driving to the top gives you a different experience. It's just not the same. If you drive to the top, and there's going to be some people that will want that way, and it would be wonderful to have a way to walk all the way on a fairly remote kind of trail that's not right next to a highway.
That was one thing that came to my mind. I went, gosh, you know, I've been hiking on some similar trails nearby, and they're steep, and the thought of having one that was longer than a mile, how many miles is this, like 3 miles or something?
This one would be 8 miles actually from Olinda Road to the top.
Yeah, so how many people you think are going to really want to hike 8 miles, you know, not virtually straight up, but definitely at a...
And once again, it could end up being a place where a lot of the community just use it for a night and afternoon place to stroll. So let's dig into just a few of these documents. In 1889, and remember the Highways Act was in 1892, so in 1889 it's still the Kingdom of Hawaii. And what this slide is just basically saying here is that we have a document where it basically, Mr. H.P. Baldwin called the attention of the board to the appropriation of $2,500 made in the last legislature for the road to the summit of Haleakala, and recommended the use of the money at the present time from Olinda to the top if this money is at the disposal of the board. So in other words, we're talking about here about governmental appropriations in the year 1889.
But you know they pertained exactly to this particular trail.
They certainly did, because of the reference here, Olinda to the top, and because the maps go from that same spot. Here's another example, 1889. Dear sir, we draw on you today for money, $200 we've paid on the account. In other words, not only was it appropriated, but they were spending money on it. This is just another 1890 tourist guide that, you know, this was becoming a very popular route. And of 1892 is when the Highways Act comes into existence. 1894, by this point, there was so much traffic going up to the top that they built a rest house at the top so that people wouldn't freeze quite the way Mark Twain had done.
Oh, is that the picture of the rest house?
That is a picture of it, yes. 1901, this is where things really get interesting. Worth Aiken, who owned land called Idlewild at the top of Olinda Road, he ran a tour company for 30 years.
They're still in Idlewild.
They're still in Idlewild. It's the same house, that's right. It's a bed and breakfast, I understand now. Yeah. And so Worth Aiken, he ran this tour company in Aikichi Arasumi, which is actually the father of the Arasumi brothers.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Of the famous contracting family?
And I've actually talked to one of the brothers who's now quite elderly, but remembers when he was about 6 years old, his father taking him on one of his trips. Aikichi Arasumi personally guided over 1,500 people on this trip. So they would go up from the steamships, they would come by automobile or by horseback to Idlewild. They would get there in the afternoon. They would go the rest of the day up that evening. They would sleep overnight and they'd watch the sunrise in the morning and come back down.
So it was an early eco tour.
There you go. 1904 and 1905 were just pivotal years for Haleakala Trail. There was a big push by Worth Aiken, who was a big booster to get things going. He understood that this was important to the economy.
But he also ran these private tours there, too.
Right. He also had a business interest in it. And but there was a lot of other people that in the Hawaii, and lots of newspaper articles saying, hey, look, we got to compete with the Big Island because they had the other best show in town. Back then, it was the craters that were drawing the people, not the beaches, apparently.
Interesting.
So anyway, what these are talking about is they're asking for appropriations again from, and now it's the territory of Hawaii. So these are appropriations. And in 1905, they had, by this point, they'd actually hired an engineer to survey the trail and to design a better trail. And you can see, for example, in this slide that there's an appropriation from the Department of Public Works, Territory of Hawaii.
Well, I think most of us can't see. We're going to have to take your word for it.
So it says Trail to Summit, Haleakala, $5,000.